Gardening is such a great hobby and it's such a great way to live a sustainable lifestyle, but it can really add up fast. Especially when you are in the gardening section and you just want to buy all the plants and all the tools, and just this one more tool can help you be such a better gardener. But then what's the point of doing it yourself and producing all this food if it costs you more than what's in the grocery store? Hey, and welcome back to Mini Urban Farm, a channel about gardening and homesteading in the suburbs. My name is Veronica, and in today's video I will be walking you through the absolute best ways to garden on a budget. Now, I did make an entire blog post on our blog, miniurbanfarm.com. If you want to read it or pin it, save it for later, whatever you guys want to do with that, you can go ahead and check that out. I will leave it in the show notes below. But if you are somebody who wants to garden on a budget and save money in your garden, your vegetable garden, because it can really add up fast, then I would encourage you to stay through the end because there are going to be some really great tips. Number one is to make your own compost. Now, I have this compost bin behind me that I've had for several years now. It is such a great way to add value back into the garden using garden scraps and using kitchen scraps. So basically what I do is that every time that I cook something, I take it and I put it in this little compost jar, essentially is what I have, like a little airtight container underneath the kitchen sink. I take all my kitchen scraps, anything that is compostable, and I put it in there. And then when that fills up, I take it and I open up these little things here, and then I just dump in all of my kitchen scraps. This is the one that I'm still adding things to. This is the one that is almost done composting. And then once you add in your kitchen scraps, you close it back up, you give it a couple more spins, like that. And it helps it to just mix everything together. Give it a couple months and you will have beautiful black gold for your garden. Now, I do have an entire video on how I do my kitchen composting in such a small space. If you'd like to look at that, or if you'd like to check that out, then I will leave it in the description below. But composting can save you a lot of money. At the beginning of each season, I just take the compost out of this exact bin and I put it all around my plants. I fertilize my plants with the compost. I mix it into the garden soil. I amend my soil with it, and it really does save me a whole heap of money, especially when it comes to making your own seed starting soil, which is our next tip. You can use this compost that you've homemade, grown from scratch in your garden, compost it here in your backyard, and turn that into seed starting soil. Now, seed starting soil is very, very expensive. It comes in tiny little bags, and if you are doing a lot of seed starting, then it adds up fast. This is my seed starting table, and I have in here my seed starting mix, which I've actually made myself. It is a mix of compost, perlite, and peat moss. Oh, there goes Milo. And basically it is a light, fluffy soil, right? If you were to buy this at the store, it costs a lot of money, a lot more than just compost in a bag, and it does take a little bit of time to put together, but it is such a great way to save yourself money. I have heaps and heaps of this that I keep in a waterproof container directly in the actual potting bench. As you can see here, this is the tub of it underneath, along with all the rest of my potting supplies, but then essentially I have a lot more of it in here, and I just transfer it back and forth, and it saves me a whole bunch of money. Alright, so next up is learn to propagate your own plants, right? If you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, which are some of my favorite stores, you will know that in the garden section, you can buy herbs and plants that range anywhere from $3 to $15, depending on their size. I always propagate my own herbs, right? I have my little herb garden here that I actually always propagate from. So I take clippings at the end of every season, or the beginning of the season, depending on what season it is, and I propagate out my own herbs, rosemary, thyme, things like that. You know, it is so easy to do. You can use that seed starting soil to propagate, and then you can give it away or sell them or plant them back in your garden. But essentially, I have grown massive rosemary bushes from 2 clippings that I took from one of my other plants. Okay, so next up is to save your own seeds. Now, I have here my seed box, right, which is where I have all of my seeds throughout the season. Anything that I bought, anything that I have been mailed to, anything that I, use in my garden, extra seeds get put in here. Now, saving your own seeds, like the ones I have here, right? You can see these were old Homestead green beans from the garden 2020. I always label my plants. If I have extras from, wherever I bought, I try to save them in the actual containers or the actual seed packs that they came in. But anything that I've saved from my own garden, I label garden and then the year, so that next season I know I can plant these out again. Now, this is such a great way to produce free plants. I probably have about 10 or 15 green bean seeds in here. It's really easy to collect most type of seeds, right? You just have to let them dry out and then, put them in a container or a little envelope or Ziploc bag or something that, they're not going to get wet, and save them in a cool, dry place. Now, I can produce probably another 10 or 15 plants from these same seeds. And actually, at the beginning of the season, I took these same seeds and I gave them away to one of my neighbors. We planted them in his garden, and he now has about 20 green bean plants. This is such a great way to save money, and it doesn't cost you anything. Another great way is by participating in seed swaps. So in this same box that I have here, I have seeds that I have exchanged my seeds for, right? So I save my seeds, I put them in little baggies, little envelopes, and then I participate in seed swaps, which means that other people who have essentially done the same thing, they have extra seeds, whether they've bought them or they've saved them from their own garden, then they send back, their own little envelopes of seeds, generally with little notes or things like that. Now, you can meet up in person and do this. Prior to COVID, there were a whole bunch of seed swaps you can participate in. Now, mostly they're via mail or on Facebook, something like that. But if you Google, seed swaps in your area, or even seed banks or things like that, you will likely find people that are willing to exchange their seeds in order for you to give them some of yours. It's just a great way to not only get, free resources when you have an abundance of one type of seed, but it's also a great way to meet new people who are interested in the same things, gardening. And it's also a great way to grow new things that you've never heard of. This season, I'm growing up 2 or 3 varieties of beans that I've never heard of, and I'm really anxious to see how they grow. So that's just a great way to save money and just expand your community at the same time. Along those same lines, while we're still talking about seeds, a good way to save money and actually garden on a budget is to order from reputable companies. Now, hear me out on this one, because it is easy to just buy whatever cheap seeds you find at the hardware store. And I have completely done that. However, those seeds are not necessarily kept in the best conditions. They have been probably sitting there for a while waiting for somebody to buy them. They are not necessarily, checked for germination rates on a regular basis. So no one is going and checking those seeds to make sure that they're still good, right? If you order from a company online like Baker Creek or Burpee, this is what they do. Instead of buying from a hardware store that sells 1,000 products and seeds are just, one of those products, order from a company that produces seeds directly to the consumers, and their product is the seeds. That way you can ensure that you're getting the best quality product and the best germination rate, because this is going to save you money in the long run. If you buy, $50 worth of seeds and you only get to use half of those, that is a waste of money. If you order from a reputable company and you're able to save those seeds for next season because you had so many seeds that germinated, then you're gonna be able to save money for many seasons at a time going forward. All right, so let's talk about soil, right? Testing your soil ahead of time is such a great way to save money, even if it doesn't seem like it at first glance, right? There's been a few times where I am gardening and I notice that something in my plants is not going well, whether they are turning yellow or turning purple, or something is indicating that they are lacking nutrients. Now, if I would have tested my soil ahead of time and amended my soil with the proper fertilizers, I would have been able to save those plants, or at least, get a better harvest for that year. So a good way to save money is by buying these little, soil amendment, soil testing strips that you can get easily on Amazon, or sending your soil to a lab to have it tested. It is not that expensive. I think it's maybe like $10 or $12 for the soil kit, and then if you send it to a lab to be tested, like your local Homestead extension, I know it's probably about $20-$25. So it's not that much, but it has the ability to save your plants in the garden, because you know exactly what your plants need ahead of time, and you are not guesstimating and buying a whole bunch of different fertilizers to try and save your plants. One of the absolute best ways to save money and garden on a budget is to just reuse items that you already have, right? So for example, I have this little snake plant, right? I didn't buy this little snake plant. It was one of the pups that came out of the other snake plants that I have, and I didn't have anywhere to put it. But thankfully, I had a whole bunch of these little extra pots, right? So I wasn't going to go out to the store and buy a whole nother container. This is something, right, the label, you can see it's falling off, and I should probably take this off at some point. But this was something that, I don't know if it was gifted to me or I had another plant in this or something like that, but this was just something I had laying around. So every time that I have plants, right, that either die, because some plants do die on me, or you have plants that get, you know, up potted or something like that, you're transplanting them into the garden, you no longer need the container, save them, don't throw them away. And I know that some people who don't love gardening as much as I do, who shall remain nameless, don't love when I hoard all these containers in the backyard, but they come in handy, they really do, because I'm not having to go out and buy a whole bunch of new containers. So every season, you know, I save these and just use things around the house. I have used egg cartons to start seeds. I have used red Solo cups, and I still use red Solo cups to do the majority of my seed starting. You know, use whatever you have around the house, as long as it is not going to, you know, kill your garden or kill your plants. Use the things you have and avoid spending money on things that you don't need if you can have something else to do just as good of a job. Another really good way to save money is by bartering or borrowing from people that you know. I don't know that many people around this area who love to garden, but I know people who have wheelbarrows and who have gardening tools that they use every once in a while, or things laying around that they don't need. Now, one thing that we like to do is, you know, we have a chicken coop and we have fresh eggs. So sometimes the neighbor next door lets us use his wheelbarrow, which we don't have, and we actually have not bought one. We probably should at some point, but for right now, it's significantly cheaper to give him a dozen eggs, and he will allow us to use the wheelbarrow for whenever we need it. Thankfully, we don't really need to use a wheelbarrow all the time, which makes it a perfect item to borrow if you don't want to invest in one, you know, just to use it a couple times a year. So if you have something, right, if you have extra tomatoes or extra homemade bread that you can do, or, you know, whatever it is that you do on your homestead, find somebody who has something that you need, offer them something in exchange, and it's really not a difficult thing to set up. The same thing with bartering. You know, I often give tomatoes to other people in the community, and they give me empty egg cartons, right? That is such a great way to get something that you need and give away something that you have an excess of. And lastly is put your chickens to good use. Now, if you don't have chickens, just hear me out on this one. Don't click out of the video yet. If you have the space for chickens, or if you know, if you're allowed to have chickens in the community you live in, chickens are such a great addition to the garden, and here's why. Chickens will eat extra food scraps that you are going to throw away from the garden, or that would just otherwise go in the compost pile. You know, chickens get fed, you know, my extra Swiss chard, my extra arugula, any extra plants that, you know, is not going to cause them harm really goes to the chickens. Any extra fruits, rotting fruits, things like that, I all just dump it into the chickens, and the chickens provide back valuable, you know, eggs and chicken meat in some cases, and then the egg yolks are very, very bright orange. Now, chicken manure is another great addition to the garden. Chicken manure, even though you have to compost it for some time before you can use it, it is such a valuable compost for the garden, and really it's, you know, it's free compost. Chickens are also great at tilling over the raised beds when the season is over. So sometimes when I am done taking everything out of my raised beds, I rip everything out, I will come and just let the chickens do their thing and spread the manure all over the garden and spread, you know, all of the nutrients around, and just make sure that everything is, you know, tilled up appropriately. They're not gonna like till up the entire earth under it, but just spread out and nice for the next season. So if you don't have chickens and you're allowed to have chickens in your area, I would definitely encourage you to get chickens. It's such an easy way to give back to the garden. And if you do already have chickens, but you're not using them in the garden, definitely let them free, you know, in the garden when you're done ripping out your beds. Use the manure in your garden, give the plants back to the chickens so that they can produce more manure, and, you know, it's really a revolving cycle. So if you do have chickens, they are such a great way to save money in your garden. I hope this video was helpful in giving you some ideas on how to garden on a budget and start a low-cost garden. You know, gardening does get expensive fast. I am definitely guilty of having spent a ton of money on this garden and buying supplies and plants that I really don't need, but by using these things, it has really helped me to cut down on costs and just be more sustainable overall. So thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe for more urban homesteading, urban gardening, chicken videos, all of that good stuff, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks.